The ideas penned by Karl Marx have had devastating consequences. Countries plagued by poverty, private property forcefully taken, the death of millions. The 20th century has been darkened by the ideas of a man virtually unknown in his own time.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The Marxist-Leninist worldview is proven to be a failure. It was doomed to fail because it was never based on reality. Communist countries continue to fail all over the world. Why then should we study Marxism-Leninism? Isn't Marxist ideology and communism dead? Marxism continues to thrive in many countries. It has a strong grip on much of Asia. African and Latin American countries continue to struggle with the Marxist ideas that took root in the mid-60s. And incredibly, on many American university campuses, Marxism flourishes. Thousands of professors frequently teach unwitting students about the evils of capitalism and advocate a Marxist utopia. Perhaps the most important reason we should study the Marxist-Leninist worldview is to make sure that these ideas are never practiced again. The old proverb rings true: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Ideas do have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. Corrupt worldviews must be understood and exposed. No religion, political system, or economy will work if it is not based on the nature of reality, especially the reality of human nature. It is precisely here that Marxism-Leninism fails.
A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. This was the opening line of Marx's Manifesto of the Communist Party, published in 1848. Known during his lifetime only to a small group of socialists and revolutionaries, Marx wrote books now considered by communists all over the world to be a source of truth on economics, philosophy, and politics. Most modern socialists also base their doctrines on Marxist theories. His most influential works are The Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, both co-written with his faithful friend Friedrich Engels. These works represent a 20-year struggle by Marx to pull together all of his theories on what he claimed was the scientific evidence of history. He combed the past for proof of a continual struggle between middle and upper-class exploiters and oppressed workers. The struggle, he predicted, would eventually lead to the final overthrow of capitalism and its supporters. Almost 70 years after their publication, the writings of Marx fueled the 1917 revolution that brought the Communist Party to power in Russia. That revolution is probably the most important political event of the 20th century. Its leader was Vladimir Lenin. Lenin, a radical revolutionary, had spent years studying the writings of Marx, as well as the technique of revolution. He had also gained a dedicated following. When the time was right, he skillfully seized control of the Russian government. The founders of communism, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, worked toward developing a society where the workers, not the landowners, controlled all the means of production. The means of production are land, factories, and machinery. They thought that to reach this ideal state, a transition period was needed, a time when the government would control the economy. They believed that if they could change the economy, they could change history. Marx claimed that all of history could be explained very simply. It is a struggle between the ruling class and the oppressed class, between the bourgeois, who owned the land, factories, and machines, and the proletariat, the oppressed and propertyless class of wage earners. Marx predicted that the oppression of the capitalists would someday crumble, giving way to socialism. His manifesto urged the end of all private property, the means of capitalists' oppression. This was ultimately a call for the forcible overthrow of all existing social institutions. Marx. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. Lenin ruthlessly put into practice the ideas penned by Marx, a collaboration that led to the greatest bloodshed in human history. Lenin's revolution assured the triumph of Marxist socialism. When he died in 1924, his successor, Joseph Stalin, promoted communism in other nations. His ruthless dictatorship transformed the Soviet Union into a major world power. In the years after World War II, all of Eastern Europe had fallen to communism. There were also successful revolutions in China in 1949 and in Cuba in 1959. Marxist governments eventually seized control of several nations in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and Latin America. For most third world nations, the promises of the communists were appealing. A government-dominated system seemed to be the only means of raising them out of poverty. The fall of Russian communism can be attributed to the countless believers and patriots who told the truth about the evil empire. Ronald Reagan, unlike the liberal media, identified the regime in the Soviet Union for what it was: evil. By 1989, this evil empire was collapsing, in spite of Mikhail Gorbachev's call for reconstruction and other superficial measures.
It is true that Gorbachev is given a lot of credit for the fall of communism, especially by our liberal left in this country, but the truth is Gorbachev never set out to destroy communism. Even today he's a hardcore Marxist-Leninist. So the truth has to be found somewhere else, and it is, but we can't admit it because Ronald Reagan was a conservative, and the left liberal cannot admit that conservative Ronald Reagan had a great deal to do with the fall of communism. But Reagan did have a great deal to do with it, and behind Ronald Reagan would stand someone like a Fred Schwartz, founder of the Christian Anti-Communism Crusade, who was involved in the struggle against communism for 40-some years.
In November of 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down, and less than a year later, East and West Germany were reunited. A major portion of the Cold War was over. In 1991, the Russian communist system collapsed where it had begun, in the Soviet Union. The Communist Party was suspended from all activity. The Soviet Union was officially dissolved that December.
What motivated these men and the countless millions who followed them to give their lives so completely to such a flawed ideology? And why do millions more today hold on to a worldview that simply does not work? To understand why, we must look at the core ideas that make up the Marxist-Leninist worldview.